On this episode, we're sitting down with the former CEO of Whirlpool, Jeff Fettig, a Kelley School of Business alum who helped lead his company through one of the worst financial collapses of all time. Let's get to the podcast. Welcome to another episode of the ROI Podcast presented by the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. I'm your host, Matt Martella, alongside Associate Dean Phil Powell. Here on the show, our mission is to help organizations make better business decisions. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, we want to welcome you to the Kelley family. For those of you who are sharing our content on social media, just want to let you know that honors us so well. We are grateful you find our episodes so valuable. If you haven't already, would you do us a favor and go to iTunes or your favorite podcasting app and leave a review and rate our show? This helps our show actually gain more visibility across the board. Also, if you're an organizational leader who is wrestling with a tough decision, if you have some feedback on our show to improve, or you know of someone who would make a great guest on our show, we would love to hear from you. Send us an email to ROIPod, that's ROIPOD at IUPUI.edu. So on this episode, we are sitting down with the former CEO of Whirlpool and Kelley grad, Jeff Fettig. Jeff started at Whirlpool following an internship in 1981 and worked his way to becoming Chief Executive Officer in 2004. Little did he know, just 4 years after getting acclimated inside the C-level suite, all his leadership training, life experiences, and personal fortitude would be put to the test.
You know, I'll never forget the day. I think it was September 15th, 2008. Lehman Brothers went under, and that kind of changed the world. Leading up to that, even through the end of August, everybody was somewhat optimistic that the economy, which was kind of bumping along, was going to get better. But, starting with the Lehman thing, as I say, every day for a long period of time after that, all news I had was bad news, and it was just got worse every day. And so everybody was grappling with, what does this mean? And we being in the consumer business, we saw the immediate impact because, I want to say our revenues in the month of September probably went down 15 or 18% immediately. Everybody said, well, that's a blip, blah, blah, blah. The fact of the matter is we didn't know. We, probably by the middle of October, we knew this was going to have a very negative impact on our business. Again, nobody knew how much. So no one had the answers. And the point of that is nobody's ever gone through it before. So there was no experience to rely upon. There was you couldn't look back 15 or 20 years and say, here's how it's going to play out. It was a new challenge that everybody was facing and nobody had experience in it.
The financial collapse of 2008 would become the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression. With no experience with such a crisis, Jeff could not be paralyzed. He had to do something. He's the CEO of a major company after all. So what does he do? But
what I did, I called our senior leadership team together. We actually physically got together for 3 or 4 days, and we kind of went through what I call scenario planning. And it's hard. It's hard for humans to be extraordinarily negative and pessimistic. But given what we were seeing, we forced ourselves to go through a process. For example, what if revenues went down by 5%? What would be the impact? What would we do? Then we said, well, what if they went down 10%? And then we'd argue, well, they've never gone down 10%. But so what if they did? And we finally worked our way up to, what if they went down by 25%? And we said, and we went through all that. And somebody asked me one time, why'd you stop at 25? Because I said, if it got worse than 25, there was nothing we could do. So we just quit there. And from that, we went through a kind of processes, in that environment, what is the most important thing? Or what are the most, and we kind of came up with a series of 10 actions that, based on revenue drop, what would we do? And we started with number 10. We're going to do that immediately. Number 9, we're going to get ready for, down to number 1. It enabled us to take clear, focused actions, the right actions. It enabled us to communicate to all employees what's going on, what we knew and what we didn't know, what we were doing, and why we had great confidence that these were the right thing, even though they were hard, they're the right things, and that the company would sustain because of it.
With little information to work with, Jeff gathered his high-level leaders and planned for the worst while hoping for the best. His best plan of attack came in the form of strong communication, building a thorough plan his organizational leaders could all agree upon. Each member of his team playing out each what-if scenario so they could make the best decision.
Leadership has to be able to deal with ambiguity. Sometimes there aren't, predictable environments. You learn the value of a strong leadership team. But at the end of the day, your job is to problem solve. And whatever the problem is, make sure you've got the folks that are capable of figuring out how to solve it, and keep your people engaged. And and if you know your business well, if you know the priorities well, and communicate. As painful as it is, you will probably get through it.
A team of trusted leaders working with the same uncertainty, yet charged to find a way to keep their organization alive. Not only does Jeff have the challenge to be the top leader, Jeff and his team must deal with a worried workforce.
When you're a CEO of a company, literally the buck stops there. So, you have to be on top of your business. You have to take action. You are not going to have all the answers, because they're worried about the company, they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about their families, there are layoffs everywhere. The equity built up in your home had evaporated overnight. The equity you had in your 401ks, everybody felt the pain. I remember very clearly, we said, look, we'll tell you everything we know, but here's what we don't know. And when we do know it, we're going to talk to you about it. But with that, I think employees take comfort when there's a clear direction and they understand what they can do to help us to get to where we're going to go. Once we know what to do, we're very focused. We communicate deeply into the organization. We explain the what, the why, and the how. We engage our folks. And when we have clear direction like that, we typically execute very well.
And as the temptation for many leaders in times of crisis becomes isolation of information, Jeff and his team recognize the need to address the fears and worries of each employee with total transparency and honesty. Now able to reflect upon the past, Jeff acknowledges their strategy brought high payouts of team morale during such turmoil.
The better informed they are, the better they can perform, and again, setting that clear priority, and taking the time to explain the what, why, and how. They're also smart people. When you explain all that, you get a lot of engagement and commitment to your priorities because they understand why we're doing them. So that's just kind of our standard operating approach anyway, but it was particularly critical during this period of time because, with all that was changing so fast, there was a lot of confusion about, and again, even then, nobody could forecast what was going to happen, the next week or month, let alone year. And so it was a real-time communications. We amped up the communications. More is better than less.
And since the buck stops with Jeff, so to speak, how did he lead himself through such a trying time?
Leadership, I guess at times can be lonely, but at the end of the day, you've got to be self-motivated. You learned that, you really didn't have time to go through the normal human grieving process, and that I kind of got to the point where no matter how bad my day was, and it really didn't matter how bad it was, my job was to go home, go to bed, and get up with positive energy and confidence and be willing to run through walls every day. And because if you as a leader didn't have that, it's contagious. The people around you aren't going to see that. The organization is not going to see that. And, you have to be self-motivated. There's a lot of people who will help you if you ask. But the point is, if the leadership doesn't provide the direction, who is? And if the leadership isn't confident, who's going to be? And, and the fact of the matter is if you really believe in what you're doing, and you really believe you set the priorities, no matter how good or bad the news is, as long as you have confidence in those things, then, in an environment which was uncharted territory, you just keep plowing ahead. And, and fortunately, even though this lasted a long period of time, we saw enough what I call small victories along the way to know that at least, the problem with knowing when the bottom is you never know until you start going up.
And up they went. After the dust settled in 2010, Jeff and his team worked tirelessly, hardly taking a day off in order to rebuild their company. Because of their efforts, Whirlpool's stock went from a low $19 a share in 2009 to over $200 a share just 6 years later. A feat no organization could accomplish without the right group of leaders. So how did Jeff find the right people?
And it starts with the fact that leadership is earned, not given. And everybody there has earned their leadership spot in the company. And that's really ultimately built on trust and respect. And, you talk about the team, I trust them, they trust me, I respect them for what they've done over time. Hopefully they respected me for what I did over time. But there was a mutual trust. And when you have that, you can have a pretty open environment in terms of, and again, you'd have to know some of the people. I had a little worries about them being afraid to tell me what I didn't want to hear, because they were very capable of telling me anything they wanted to do. Okay, even if I didn't like it, and they knew it. And I had a point of view as well. I said, look, I probably have an opinion on everything. Okay, and that's my position until you prove different. But if you prove different, I'll thank you for it, because you've taught me something that I didn't know. And the more people speak up, the more you learn, and the more you learn. That's part of diversity and inclusion. Is it's about diversity of thought, and the more and it's actually good to walk away and say, wow, this is a better outcome, a better decision than what I could have done by myself.
And not only defending Whirlpool's culture of diversity and inclusion, Jeff also needed to take charge of his schedule to ensure the most valuable resource, his time, which had to be spent productively and appropriately.
Time is a very finite resource. There's 7 days a week, there's 24 hours a day. So that's what you got. And the good thing about being a CEO is you fundamentally choose. I think of where I spend my time as CEO around three buckets: strategy, operations, people/talent, and just general leadership activities. And so in this period of time, I'd say, well, we weren't too worried about strategy at this time. Okay, this was about operations, and so operations went top of the list. People and people development activities, we didn't abandon them by any means. But I would say leadership and leadership forums and leadership communications to, again, employees, customers, and shareholders was, probably second in my priority. Operations was first, that was second. And, we had long hours, worked 7 days a week, blah, blah, blah. But it also allows you to focus. When you're faced with, near-death crises, it becomes very easy to focus. So a lot of the peripheral things that you typically get hit up just was, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this and only this. And so it is actually easier to focus during, quote, quote, a crisis than just when things are just bumping along okay.
Following the success of their hard work, Jeff and his team, along with the entire Whirlpool organization, could finally take a breath once the impact of the 2008 recession blew over. But after working 7 days a week for over 3 years, how did Jeff find his work-life balance again?
I get the work-life balance question a lot from folks throughout the organization, and my answer is the same answer I have for me my whole career is, that's up to me. That's 100% up to me. Yes, I worked a lot during my career. Yes, I worked a lot of weekends, nights, holidays, etc. But when we planned family vacations, we had family vacations. When my kids had a soccer or tennis match and I wanted to be there, I planned to be there, and I was there. And so, I think time management boils down to schedule management. And, you learn not to waste time. Very simple example. Look at your schedule for last week. I've got it, it's on my phone, whatever. And how many productive hours did you have and how many wasteful hours did you have? That's what it boils down to.
Matt, Jeff makes some powerful points about time management in a crisis. And it starts with his very simple observation that time management is the leader's choice. She or he has the ability to allocate his time however she or he wants. Notice that Jeff was smart enough to surround himself with smart people, to be transparent with information, and to make sure whatever he was doing was in a team environment. He didn't make decisions or reflect in isolation. So what this means is that when you surround yourself with the right environment, that however you manage your time in a crisis, and time management during a crisis is almost an oxymoron. When you're in crisis mode, you're responding, and you're trying to minimize damage, and you're trying to show empathy, and you move from step to step. You have to compartmentalize. And here's the good news. If you surround yourself with the right environment, you're guaranteed that as you move from item to item to item in what may feel like chaos, you're guaranteed to be productive and to generate value. And compare that to if you're following your gut and moving from item to item, but you're doing it in an environment where you've isolated yourself as a leader.
So let's recap. The financial fallout of 2008 became a trying time for every business leader. Along with the rest of the globe, Whirlpool saw major declines in demand, stock prices, and overall liquidity. Jeff Fettig and his team worked tirelessly to sustain and eventually rebuild their brand. But how? First, Jeff needed to rely on the people who earned their leadership inside his organization. Understanding he did not have all the answers, he conducted scenario planning strategies for every fallout situation and how his team would act in the months and years to come. While working through and agreeing upon these strategies, Jeff and his team were also dealing with fear and worry felt by the entire organization. Communication became paramount, especially when they had no answers. Giving their organization such open and honest feedback built much needed morale in such uncertain times. But how did Jeff deal with leading himself? He had no choice but to remain confident and encourage each day because, as he said,
the point is, if the leadership doesn't provide the direction, who is? And if the leadership isn't confident, who's going to be?
The values of a leader are contagious, especially in times of crisis and uncertainty. While Jeff and his team continued marching through the mud left over by this financial collapse, Jeff needed to understand he did not have all the answers, but his team did. Jeff could not simply hear what he thought was right. His team had to feel empowered to speak truth, especially when there was disagreement. This collaboration ultimately brought about incredible ideas that led Whirlpool out of this financial pit. Now the organization continues marching in the right direction, growing profits, increasing demand, and confident in their liquidity. And though Jeff is no longer the CEO, his legacy will remain timeless. This has been another episode of the ROI Podcast presented by the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. I'm your host, Matt Martella, alongside Associate Dean Phil Powell, working hard to help organizations make better business decisions. We'll see you next week.